Welcome everyone to the AFSC Facebook Mini Live. I'm really glad that you're joining us this Wednesday afternoon. My name is Saida Namaste, and I'm the program co-director of the AFSC New Mexico program. And so I'm here in Albuquerque and really happy to be facilitating today's Facebook Mini Live with my colleagues in Atlanta. So if you're joining us, it'd be great if you could put in the chat where are you joining from? And today we're talking about housing justice. So I'm curious to know if in the city that you live in, are you seeing a housing crisis? I'm here in Albuquerque, and sadly, we are in a really bad housing crisis that's been exacerbated by COVID, and we don't have enough affordable housing. We're just really seeing rents and things just increase. So it's tough here. So I'm really excited to hear today from my colleagues Foluke and Natalie about what they're doing for housing justice. So please put in the chat, where are you listening in from? And are you seeing a housing crisis in your own city? We're going to have about 20 minutes today for this Facebook Mini Live. And Foluke and Natalie will be showing us some slides and talking about the work that they're doing. So I'm going to turn it over now to Foluke and Natalie. And thanks so much for being with us today and teaching us about this amazing work that you're doing in Atlanta.
Yeah, thank you, Syra. Thank you so much for the introduction. And thank you again for being here. And thanks to everyone who is joining the live stream. So again, my name is Foluke Nunn. I am a community organizer with the Atlanta Economic Justice Program, which works on housing justice issues primarily in Atlanta and the Atlanta metro area. And I'll pass it to my colleague, Natalie, to introduce herself.
Awesome. It's great to be here. My name is Natalie, and I am staff with Housing Justice League. It's a small grassroots organization in Atlanta that is a partner of the American Friends Service Committee. And we focus on community organizing around issues of housing inequality and housing injustice.
Great. Thanks, Natalie. And so, Bo, you can go ahead and start to share the PowerPoint. Awesome. Thank you. So today, I thought we could give an update on the eviction crisis and then talk about some of what Housing Justice League and AFSC are doing to respond. I'm sure a lot of you all have heard about the crisis in the news around the eviction moratorium. And so to begin, we just want to give a bit more background for folks who may not be as familiar. So Bo, you can go to the next slide. Great. So there was a CDC eviction moratorium that was put in place, I believe, last August, and that officially ended on July 31st. And so throughout the past year, there were periods where folks were afraid it would expire, and then it ended up being extended a few times by the Biden administration, and folks were afraid that this time it would be the final time and it would lapse. It actually did lapse, but a new moratorium was enacted for areas with rising COVID cases, which is said to cover 90% of tenants in the US at this time. And this moratorium is set to expire on October 3rd. It may be extended or it may end even sooner than that. It's hard to tell what's going to happen at this point because the moratorium is being challenged in court. And as I said, we have no idea. We have no way of knowing whether it'll be extended again. And then the other big piece is that rental assistance rental assistance was made available by the Biden administration, but it's being distributed very slowly. And a lot of folks are having a hard time taking advantage of it, and some people have been evicted before they could take advantage of it. So at the bottom of the screen, there are a few stats about evictions that are specific to the Atlanta metro area. So right now, about 1 in 5 metro Atlanta renters owe back rent. And about 150,000 renters in Georgia are at risk of eviction. That may actually, the number may actually be larger than that. I believe this stat may be specific to evictions that have been filed so far, but landlords have been waiting to file evictions because of the moratorium. So it's likely that even more people than that are actually being threatened with an eviction. And then only 12% of the federal funds for rental assistance have been distributed so far, just in the metro Atlanta area. And I'll pause. Natalie, do you have anything to add to this?
Sure. It's a good overview. I would just want to say it's important for people to understand that what we're calling the eviction crisis has been going on for decades, and we were working on this issue before the pandemic started in Fulton County, which is where Housing Justice League is based. We were seeing 800 evictions every week before the pandemic, and with the pandemic and the moratorium, eviction rates actually went down because landlords couldn't file. Of course, that doesn't mean that people were like doing okay, because they were not paying their rent and they were going to face eviction, and now they are facing eviction, many of them. But this is just an ongoing situation that was made worse in a lot of ways by the pandemic, but was already really serious beforehand. And with the moratorium, one of the biggest challenges, we run a hotline, which we're going to talk more about later, but people who we were talking to, it's like the moratorium would be expiring 3 days, and we're talking to them on the hotline, and we're like, this isn't really going to help you at this point, but then it would get renewed. And that just kept happening. And every single time it was like everybody was just like on the edge of a cliff waiting to hear whether this thing was going to get renewed. And the information put out about it was just so minimal. So many people calling the hotline had no idea that this was a protection that existed for them or how to get protected by it, because it was made in a way that tenants had to take action in order to get the protection. And it could have just been an automatic protection for anyone who needed it. But we live in a very landlord and private property friendly society. So that's not what we saw.
Yeah, no, thanks for those additions, Natalie. And yeah, like that's something else that's big, is that the way in which this was rolled out was not easy to understand or helpful. And it was immensely stressful for tenants to have to deal with the uncertainty of whether they'd be able to stay in their home for, another few weeks or months or however long. And so it's still a very unstable situation for a lot of people. Bo, you can go to the next slide. So Natalie started talking a bit about what the Atlanta Economic Justice Program and Housing Justice League's response has been so far. But again, to echo what she said, the eviction defense work started before the pandemic. And then since the pandemic, we've added to some of those efforts. So something that began at the beginning of the pandemic was the Tenant Power Hotline. We actually renamed it the Tenant Power Hotline recently. Originally, it was a COVID-19 housing emergency hotline. We knew that when folks lost work, they would need to pay their rent. And at that time, early in the pandemic, there weren't any protections. I mean, a few localities were implementing eviction moratoria, but it wasn't enough. So we decided to set up this hotline to provide people with support, mainly organizing support. So giving people the support they needed to join together with their neighbors, because there is power in numbers, and so many people were experiencing crises that it was important to encourage organizing as a tactic. So encouraging people to negotiate with their landlords for reduced rent, or for a rent pause, or for no late fees, or for whatever it was they were experiencing. We also provided and continue to provide referrals to financial aid and legal aid resources. The hotline is in English and Spanish. That's something that we were happy to be able to provide to folks, because we were in the beginning, actually throughout the hotline's lifetime, we had Spanish callers. So we wanted to make sure that we had resources available to them as well. And the hotline is staffed by volunteers. And I need to look, I should have looked up the most recent numbers, but I know that we've fielded over 1,000 calls since it started in March 2020. And then a resource that we launched was a petition platform, which was created last summer to help people launch and crowdsource support for their own housing fights. And that petition platform, it was created because we knew that our hotline team couldn't handle the flood of need that there was. So this platform, anyone in the country, no matter where you are, can use the platform to call attention to whether it's an eviction or landlord harassment, any type of housing issue. And you can see the link there in the slide. And then in a little while, Bo will also be putting links to all the resources we talk about in the comments, and so you can find the link there as well. And then the last thing that we've been working on is building out a crisis response team. So we realized while operating the hotline that we need to be prepared for when people call who are in the middle of a crisis. Folks have contacted the hotline before in the middle of an eviction, and there wasn't a whole lot that we could do. So we want to be prepared for those instances if they happen more often in the future. So right now we're in the middle of working out what the best approach could be, and we have been focusing on coming up with an initial plan to respond and training volunteers. But we wanted to have a way to put feet on the ground for people who are experiencing an eviction and provide them with whatever support they may need. And so real fast, just wanted to also mention, this is the image on the slide is an image of the eviction defense manual that Housing Justice League published for Fulton County, which is Atlanta's county, a couple of years ago. And so these manuals walk through the eviction process for tenants who may be experiencing evictions and give some tips to them for how to navigate that process. And that's been a very valuable tool to have during this time. And I'll hand it over to Natalie.
I don't know if I have too much more to add besides that our original idea with the eviction defense manual was that it was an organizing tool, because we know that the law is always within the landlord's favor, especially in a state like Georgia, which is one of the more landlord-friendly states. So even if you know all your rights and you have legal assistance in your case, there's still a very low chance of winning in court, in landlord-tenant court. And we see that statistically. But we did want something tangible that we can offer people and have a conversation about these things, and reduce the harm as much as possible if they're not able to organize, before their court date. But we wanted this to be a way to connect with communities, and have these conversations and help people to build power from where they live. Because tenants do have power. They're the ones that create the wealth of landlords. And it just is a matter of organizing that power.
Yeah. Thanks, Natalie. Bo, you can go to the next slide. And so we wanted to include just a few stats on folks who called the hotline. These stats are specific to March 2020 through February 2021. And just as a disclaimer, these stats are very imperfect because the previous intake process we were using as part of the hotline wasn't designed to collect all this information. So you'll notice that there's a lot of information that is unknown, but we have revamped the intake form since then. And we revamped the process as well to collect better data on who's calling and why. But just to go over some of what we have here, about 6.4% of callers were facing a self-help eviction, which is when a landlord tries to kick somebody out without going through the court process. So by changing the locks or by shutting off utilities. And so there were a substantial percentage of folks who did call who were experiencing those circumstances or whose landlord had threatened to do that. And then about 10% of people were facing a court-ordered eviction. So when the landlord goes through the court process and files for an eviction, and then of course, about 70, the vast majority of people who called us were struggling to pay their rent or their mortgage. There were some people who called who weren't dealing with an issue around payments. Some people called because they were experiencing terrible living conditions. Some people called because of a different issue that they were having with their landlord, some other type of harassment. But the vast majority were calling because they were having a hard time paying. And then another solid majority were calling because they feared eviction. Maybe their landlord hadn't filed or hadn't moved to change their locks, but they had said, yeah, I'm going to evict you if you don't pay in X amount of time. Natalie, do you have anything to add to this? Nope. Okay. Bo, you can go to the next slide. And then here are some stats on landlord abuse that we were able to collect through the hotline. Again, these are very imperfect. As you can see, a lot is unknown because for a long time we weren't specifically asking people about this. This is just what we could glean from going back through the records of the hotline. But at least 20%, so at least 1 in 5 of the people who had called had faced landlord threats or harassment. And then at least 1 in 10 of the folks who had called were facing some type of habitability issue. So if the landlord, if their pipes had burst and the landlord hadn't fixed their pipes, or if they had like holes in the roof or any type of housing issue, about 10% of callers were dealing with landlords who had not corrected those. You can go to the next slide. So here we have some resources. And again, Bo is going to put these in the comment section, or you can take a screenshot because this is a lot to write down. But if you need rental assistance, a good site, if you or someone you know need rental assistance, a good site to go to is consumerfinance.gov/rent help. They have a lot, they have a database that can connect you to rental assistance by where you are in the country. Another thing that you should be aware of to take advantage of the moratorium is the CDC self-declaration form. And so it's a very long URL. You could also Google CDC self-declaration form, eviction moratorium, and the same thing will come up. But there's a new, as Natalie mentioned before, it's on tenants to be covered by the eviction moratorium by saying that they have been experiencing financial hardship. And so you had to fill out a form before, but this form is a new form that's where I believe you also have to affirm that cases in your county are rising. So if you would like to be protected by the moratorium, it's very important to fill this out and to present it to your landlord. And then the next link is it shows different types of housing resources based on where you are in the country. So whether they focus on housing justice organizing, advocacy, or legal aid, you can find them at justshelter.org. We've also included links to some of our local resources. So the petition platform, you can find at housingjustice.controlshift.app. The eviction manual, you can find at housingjustice.org/eviction defense. I should add that those manuals are specific to Atlanta area counties. We have one for Fulton County and DeKalb County. But generally speaking, and Natalie, you can correct me if I'm wrong, those some of the broader aspects of that process do apply to evictions, no matter where you are in the country. And then finally, the Tenant Power Hotline, if you're in the Atlanta area, you can call 404-946-9953.
Amazing. Thank you, Foluke and Natalie, for these resources. And I see that Bo is putting them in the chat. We had a question for folks who wanted to share this later. And yes, this is recorded, so you can come back to this page and share it with other folks. And we have people, go ahead and keep putting in the chat if you have questions, or share what city you're in and if you're facing something similar in your city with the housing crisis. one thing that really stood out to me hearing the two of you speak is the fact that our society is more focused on private property and landlord rights. I know in Albuquerque, when people were worried about eviction, they were like going to social media and just saying, what do I do? How do I prevent my eviction? Because we don't have a hotline. So I'm so grateful that you all have set up a hotline, because people were just asking each other, and everyone was saying, well, they can't evict you, it's illegal, but it's much more complicated, as you said, in terms of the forms that have to be filled out. So I'm just awesome that you have that tenant hotline, because we needed it here. In Albuquerque, we had 300 illegal evictions in the first 4 months of the eviction moratorium, and they were from the same 7 landlords. So we're starting to make lists of like, who are the slumlords, who are the landlord prop. But as you all were saying, it's biased towards the landlord. So there's no enforcement of the eviction moratorium. So we've had, and our city is about the same size as Atlanta. So 300 illegal evictions in a short window is really problematic. Are you seeing that too? Are you seeing illegal evictions, or people that just don't know how to do the paperwork and aren't even aware of the paperwork?
Well, I just wanted to speak to your point around how easy it is for landlords to carry out self-help evictions, and thinking about, what are the role of the police in our society. It becomes pretty clear that it's to protect private property, because landlords get the police to come out and throw people out of their homes. But if a tenant calls the police because they're being illegally evicted, the police actually can't do anything. They can come, but they're going to say that it's a civil matter and that the tenant has to take their landlord to court. So we've seen that happen several times. So we've stopped trying to think that the police are going to do anything for tenants.
Wow, good point. Yeah, I wonder if the police were involved in these illegal evictions.
And I guess to your question about whether we've been seeing a large uptick in illegal / self-help evictions, I would say so far there hasn't been a huge influx of them on the hotline. However, we anticipate that as the moratorium kind of drags on, not drags on, but like continues, there may be more self-help evictions as landlords may choose to go around the process of filing for an eviction. So that's part of why we've been building out our crisis response team to be able to respond when that happens, and show up and say, hey, this is illegal, move people back into their homes as needed. And then something else that I thought of, Natalie, would you like to talk a bit about efficiency lodge? So I think that's a good example of self-help eviction that our hotline encountered recently.
Yeah, and that was also the clearest example for us of the police not being able to do anything for tenants who are facing self-help eviction. So efficiency lodge, it's an extended stay. There's a ton of people. I wish I had precise statistics, because it really does matter the amount of people living in extended stay hotels. And those are often people who are kind of in between tenancy and being on the street, because they have low credit scores or eviction records, so they can't get a lease, or they can't rent month to month, because landlords aren't willing to take on that financial risk. So people end up in extended stay hotels, and they have to pay a whole lot more to stay there than they would in a regular tenancy situation. And the owners of extended stays don't respect eviction law. And there's a case right now that Atlanta Legal Aid brought against the owners of Efficiency Lodge, claiming that tenants who live at Efficiency Lodge are tenants because they've been living there, many of them, for more than 3 years, and that the courts need to recognize that this is a landlord-tenant relationship. The owners of Efficiency Lodge treat their residents as tenants the same way that property owners of low-income apartment complexes do. So they're trying to get the law to more explicitly recognize extended stay residents, especially if they've been living there for a certain period of time to be, or if it's their primary residence, to be tenants and have the rights that tenants have.
That's a great example. Well, thank you, Foluke and Natalie. I know we do these kind of short and there's so much to cover, but I really appreciate you sharing what the crisis looks like in Atlanta and the incredible work you're doing with the tenant hotline, with the eviction defense manual, with the crisis response team. And I wish every city had your programs, because I think it's needed. You're a great model for the rest of us. So really appreciate the work you're doing and hope to hear an update again soon.
Yeah, no, for sure. Thank you, Syra, for facilitating, and thank you everyone for tuning in. And if you have any other questions or comments about our work, you can email evictiondefense@housingjusticeleague.org, or you can email me directly, FNUNN@AFSC.org.
Okay, and we'll see you next time on AFSC Facebook Live. Thanks for everyone who joined us, and we'll see you again.
Thank you so
much.
Thank
you all.